So this talk is about a study we are running with the European Space Policy Institute in Vienna. And the overarching question here is about research impact. And as we prepare for the new ESA climate program, we ask ourselves, how much impact have we had on domestic policies? And what should we consider doing in the future to improve this impact? So let's see if I can change the slide. Yeah. So this morning we talked about ideas for future ESA activities to support the IPCC. And we also heard from Richard today that the most recent IPCC AR6 report is the strongest, most significant to date, and that ESA's input considerably supported the report's headline statements. So over the past decade, the ESA CCI program has grown to be something excellent. More and more, we have satellite climate data records been used to show how our planet has been changing. And IPCC AR6 not only recognizes that our observational capabilities have improved, but the last report also stated that the emergence of satellite climate data records has provided essential data at global and regional scales for monitoring changes to our climate system. So I am pleased to say we're doing a good job. Now we have a lot of scientific evidence of a changing planet, and in the run-up to COP26, now more than ever, the question is, are we being heard? So this is SDG 13, take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. So it's action. If you go to the COP26 website, it's interesting how we have to highlight that it's the youth who drive action. You know, Greta will save us. That's the idea, is it? But climate action depends on policy. It's the decision makers who need to act. Here's a cheap and cheerful non-scientific graph I did yesterday. For those of you who don't know Google Ngram Viewer, it shows the trends of the words that have occurred in the Google Books corpus. And this one is for climate change, climate policy, and climate action. And I think none of us are surprised to see these trends. We all know already we don't have enough action. So action implies you act on prior knowledge. We are providing this knowledge. We, all of us here, are scientific experts, but just presenting the evidence doesn't automatically translate into useful policies. And action, then, is the end step in the policy chain. So to act, we need these policies, and we want those policies to be guided by evidence. Has the European Space Agency and its CCI program actively supported domestic climate policies? That's the question. Because building these climate data records is, of course, excellent science, but making sure that this effort is also turned into solutions for governments to address the climate challenge, that's really where we need to figure out if there is a missing link and how to get these details right. So the motivation for this European Space Policy Institute study really was, what role has the ESA CCI played regarding climate policies on a national as well as an EU level? And how can we further make an impact to support our member states? So the idea is to get actionable insights on how to improve our CCI research impact, because not only do we want our research to be meaningful and help advance climate science, but moreover, we need it to be meaningful and help advance society. So the ESPI study follows these three work packages. The first one was on policy landscaping. So the team looked into the state of affairs in the field of climate-related policy in ESA member states and at the European Union level. So they did this desktop study reviewing public policy documents in selected ESA member states. And it was quite extensive. So there were quite a lot of documents that were reviewed here. Then the next work package was on policy impact evaluation. So the team investigated the role of the ESA CCI program in support of climate policies in Europe. They analysed the science to policy chain with a particular focus on adaptation policies. Work package 3 is on policy engagement for greater impact. So the team is going to investigate opportunities for ESA CCI to increase the policy relevance and policy impact of its activities, which is also why we asked you all to fill out a short survey on how you as a CCI scientist perceive your own research. So work package 3 is still ongoing. And the methodology ESPI used for evaluating the research impact follows a well-known concept of backward mapping. So you track the impact of the research by starting with the policy. And there are many ways in which academics and scientists can contribute to the creation of a policy, and how ESA CCI input may influence the definition of new climate policies in its member states. And these include agenda setting, so identifying new issues or new ways of looking at policy challenges, expert moderation, that's clarifying options available to policymakers and facilitating agreement. Then clarifying concepts, questioning false assumptions, so prompting analysis of missing assumptions and identifying likely consequences. Then also, guidance on structuring a decision, a substantive advice, drawing on established bodies of evidence to advise on what to do and in what context, technical tips, and so on. And to further understand the role of ESA CCI, ESPI explored the different types of references which may be presented in the policy documents. So, of course, the whole point is not just about going through the citations in the documents. We wouldn't just assume that we would assess policy impact as equal to peer-reviewed publications mentioned in policies. That's one part of the story. We also need to look at the type of policy impact. So it's also about the how. So how have ESA, the CCI, and its scientists potentially influenced policymakers? Have there been policy changes? Have there been changes in the delivery of public services, such as education programs or like employment in green sectors, or even in health services related to climate risks, such as heat waves? Have there been changes in policy direction or new processes that are adopted in public policy? So they're still looking into this aspect. So just a couple of examples of how climate science can be translated into climate policies. And I'm focusing on the adaptation policies here to illustrate what type of evidence-based climate policies can be made. So first example is from Switzerland. This is the Swiss National Adaptation Action Plan 2020 to 2025. And it refers to the 2013 IPCC report. And the IPCC report itself is used by the National Center for Climate Services to create regular climate scenarios. And then it is the 2018 Swiss Climate Scenario Report that drives the basis for many of the adaptation measures in the plan. So this type of example is quite common. The National Swiss Adaptation Action Plan, it basically references the IPCC report. Similar, the second example is from Norway. Norway's adaptation policy is established through a white paper called Climate Change Adaptation in Norway. This is quite unique, as the white paper looks more like a legal document than a policy program, which would usually be the case for most other countries. But despite this format, it is still informed by scientific references. And the main climate change risks mentioned are sea level rise, avalanches. There's a particular focus on the Arctic, of course, and extreme weather patterns, flooding and landslides. And the white paper goes on to address climate change adaptation in different sectors, nature management, agriculture, forestry, fisheries, health, buildings, infrastructure, and business sector. And this white paper was issued in 2013, and it still serves as the country's overarching adaptation strategy. So this is another thing about the policies. They're quite dated, and while there often is extra background material issued as updates, the science that underpins the policies themselves will be older still. So in this case, we actually find that some of our CCI scientists are referenced in particular on climate change adaptation risks related to glaciers and sea ice. But of course, the scientific information is from the early days of the CCI. And the white paper itself states that everyone, so individuals, industry, and government, are responsible for climate change adaptation, and that government will ensure that the knowledge base of climate change adaptation is strengthened, and that all adaptation policies should build on the best available knowledge available with regular assessments of vulnerability and adaptation needs in Norway. So in particular, also referring to new knowledge based on any current and future releases of IPCC assessment reports. So just want to highlight again from both examples that the IPCC reports therefore aren't just important for the national framework under the UNFCCC, but also get picked up directly on national level, because trust-based evidence gathering may yet be a difficult issue for policymakers, and this providing the scientific evidence that they can trust, that's really crucial. And that is certainly something we as ESA need to make sure that we also are seen as one of those trusted entities. So you would say, of course we are a trusted entity. We're right on brand. Many of you answered the survey ESPI sent out to you about how, on a national level, you perceived your scientific relevance and impact. Yeah, note those are two separate things, impact and relevance. So on this slide, you see the results from the survey on how you would rate the policy relevance of your research. Looks pretty good, I would say. On a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is low and 5 is high, I'm quite pleased to see that most of you thought your research was relevant. And now let's have a look at the next question, which was how would you rate the policy impact of your research? Picture is a little different here. 8 people consider research to have significant impact, so well done there. What about actually having contributed to drafting of climate policy? Here are the results for the question on whether, to your knowledge, had some of your publications been cited or consulted in drafting of public documents. And there was a time frame since 2008. And 39% of you said yes. And the examples that were given include policy documents such as publications by the European Commission for the reform of the Common Agricultural Policy, and French national climate reports. Others provided examples such as the IPCC reports and UNFCCC Substa scientific dialogue. And ESPI highlights that these, of course, are not policy documents per se, but we appreciate it is certainly relevant. And finally, regarding the question, have you been consulted at any point in national climate policy making processes? The honest answer is that 74% of the survey respondents said no. Those of you that said yes gave answers including national monitoring programs for national level adaptation policies and as parts of scientific committees. Yeah, others mentioned that they were consulted for EU-level policies, including the EU CO2 observation strategy and the EU methane strategy. Okay, so that was all nice to hear. And all of these questions were subjective, of course. It was about how you perceive your research. What if we flip it? How do policymakers and civil servants and ministries see ESA and its science community? So ESPI, in fact, did an expert consultation in which it became abundantly clear that ESA and its data products were not a household name. And in fact, I sat in on one of those sessions and was a little shocked to hear that civil servants working in ministries of environment suggested we should look at forests from space because that would be really useful. And all I was thinking was, we've been doing this for a long, long time. However, yeah, it was also highlighted that the legitimacy of the data and the quality assurance means a great deal to policymakers, and that this is somewhere ESA can be seen as a trusted entity. Certainly, the IPCC reports have established themselves as trusted scientific evidence. But as I said, ESA is not a household name, and it feels like we still have some work to do to establish ourselves as a trusted entity then. So there are still quite a lot of research impact challenges, and these are just a few that ESPI highlighted, but let's not forget that challenge is a neutral word. It sits somewhere between a problem and an opportunity. So let's focus on the opportunities. And the takeaway message from today is, on the one hand, keep up the good work in terms of scientific uptake in the IPCC process. And then on the other hand, let's make sure we can establish ourselves better as that trusted scientific entity. Yeah, because ultimately we, ESA and its scientists, need to take on the challenge and figure out how best to support our member states in helping their long-term climate pledges hold up. And as I said, the study is still ongoing, and hopefully in a month or two, we'll have completed it and have some more results for the last work package. That's all from me.
Thanks, Anna Maria. I think there's a lot of stuff there that maybe the science community isn't so familiar with, and maybe takes some digesting. But hopefully this will help inform us and help us improve in future how we work, how we actually get the impact of the science through to the policies, and then hopefully that might, well, first of all mean that the work we're doing actually goes to benefit countries, and also might maybe motivate some more funding for this kind of work. I wonder, do we have any questions for Anna Maria